So today I want to go over an updated version of my wolf-focused companion druid build for Season 7. And while this build isn't in its final form, this stage of this build is significantly stronger than my previous version, and this stage allows you to do everything in World Tier 4 to allow you to keep farming gear to get to that final stage of the strongest version of, this build. Now, some of the biggest changes to this version is adding in some of our uniques. We're using 2 normal uniques and 1 mythic unique. The mythic is Heir of Perdition. The main reason we're using this is the special effect just gives you a 60% increase to all of your damage, and that's multiplicative. So it's a pretty big damage increase. The affixes are okay. Movement speed is nice. Lucky hit is nice, and critical strike chance is okay. The core skill increase is kind of useless, but you're basically just using this for a massive damage increase, which usually doesn't come on most helms. And I'm not sure if I'll be using this or Shaco in my final version of this build, but either or is going to work generally fine. And then for our other 2 uniques, we're using Eridi's Inexorable Will, which is the ring we went over in my previous video, and is also kind of important for how this build is working right now. The special of this is when you cast an ultimate skill, and again 5 seconds later, you pull in all distant enemies and deal some amount of damage. That damage is also scaled by how much willpower you have, and the scaling of this was actually increased. I think it used to be 1% and now it's up to 10. So just sitting here before any of our other buffs, the damage of using our ultimate is increased by 27,000%. So the actual damage of pulling in those distant enemies, you'll see in some of the footage when we're in our pit runs that you can actually kill some of the smaller enemies just by using this. And this is going to mix very well with our other unique, which are Storm Companion Lakes. And the main reason we're using these is your wolf companions are infused with the power of the storm, dealing lightning damage and gaining the Storm Howl ability. The Storm Howl ability really doesn't show you anywhere, but basically what it does is it adds more tags to your wolves. They're now Nature Magic, Chain, and Storm, which is going to allow them to work with a bunch of other skills, but it changes its active into basically just being an AoE. So now when you use your active, your wolves teleport to that target and do an AoE instead of just doing a strike on a singular target. Now, why this is so good is because we use our ultimate and our ring pulls everything together. We use our wolf's active ability, which is our main damage dealer in this build, and they AoE everything that's pulled together, and you basically just insta-kill full packs of enemies. That's generally how this build is working right now. And the stats on both of these uniques are also pretty good. You get a really big willpower % scaling, more lucky hit chance, more damage to close enemies, more ultimate cooldown reduction, so we can use our Petrify a lot more. Then for Storm Companions, these are really good. Wolf's attack speed, we get an increase to our pack leader Spirit Boon, which is our Spirit Boon that lets us reset our companion skills, and then damage reduction from close enemies, and then massive plus ranks to wolves. So these 2 uniques are massive increases for this build. But that brings us to our skill tree. Starting with our basic skill, we're going to be using Maul. This is primarily to transform us into Werebear and out of it. And then upgrade 1, Maul can now fortify us, so we can get a little bit of Spirit Gen if we need it, and we can get a little bit of Fortify and shapeshift us back and forth, which will proc some other effects. Then we're going into Shred. This is primarily for movement and for spending our resources. And then upgrade 1 increases attack speed and it heals us some. Upgrade 2 makes all of the attacks of Shred now have dashes. So it's just good for movement and for spending our resources to proc a bunch of other effects. And then obviously it has a lucky hit chance to also allow us to proc more of our companion skills. Then we're going down 1 into Bloodhowl, which is just a heal. Upgrade 1 reduces the cooldown on kill. Upgrade 2 gives us increased attack speed. And then we have Debilitating Roar, just a damage reduction to all enemies around us. Upgrade 1 fortifies us, which is one of our main ways of constantly fortifying ourselves. Upgrade 2 gives us a damage increase when it's active. And also these are cooldowns, which are going to be really important when we get to other parts of the build. Then we obviously have our wolves 5 points into this, our main damaging ability. Upgrade 1 will still increase damage to CC'd or poison enemies, so all the time. Then we're using Ferocious Wolfpack, which is a lucky hit. Your wolves can fortify you. Now you can also go into Brutal Wolfpack. When you critically strike, your wolves have increased attack speed, and this will be better for damage, but as you get more and more gear, you actually start to cap your attack speed, and the extra fortify from this is actually pretty nice. Then we have 1 point into Ravens. We're not actually putting this on our bar. This is primarily to get the upgrades. Then we have increased increased critical strike chance when ravens hit something, but we're primarily doing this for brutal ravens. You now have additional ravens because we get more scaling for every additional summon we actually have. Then we're going all the way down. We're taking our ultimate 5 points into Petrify, stuns everything around you, makes them take increased critical strike damage, and it's buffed up even more against bosses. Upgrade 1 is what actually gives you the increased critical strike damage. It also increases its duration. Then upgrade 2, it reduces the cooldown for every enemy hit and reduces the cooldown when hitting bosses. This is also super good, especially when you're saying pit runs and there's a lot of enemies around. You pop this, it reduces the cooldown by 1 second for everything hit. You can just get this back instantly sometimes. And then we have our passives, 1 into Predatory Instinct to get 3 into Iron Fur, gives you damage reduction while going into Werebear 3 seconds after. So anytime you maul, you get that 3 or more seconds of damage reduction. Then 3 into Backlash, you deal increased damage after using a defensive. It'll be up a majority of the time. Ancestral Fortitude for increased resistances. Then Vigilance for damage reduction after using a defensive, which again, be up majority of the time. 3 into Humanity, you deal increased damage while in human form. Now why this is so good is because when you use wolves, it puts you into human form. So you use your wolf ability and it'll be getting that damage increase from humanity. 3 into Feral Aptitude, you deal increased damage while healthy and even more increased damage while above a certain movement speed, which will always be. These bonuses stack, so just big damage increase. Call the Wild, your companion skills deal massively increased damage. Then going down 1 into Neurotoxin to get 3 into Envenom. You and your companions deal increased bonus crit damage against poison enemies, everything are poisoned. Also one of the best rolls to get on your necklace. Then we're going down 3 into Defiance. Nature skills deal increased damage to elites, then 3 into Natural Disaster. This is primarily for your storm skills deal increased damage to CC'd enemies, and this is for our companions because our wolves now deal storm damage. This is also something I've been thinking about changing up and putting points into other areas just to see, but then we have 1 into Defensive Posture. You get more Fortify and you get some damage reduction while fortified. 3 into Catastrophe, when you use your ultimates, you gain increased damage for 8 seconds. 3 into Quick Shift, when you change animal forms, get stacking damage increase. It's lost if you're in human form for 3 seconds, but we're constantly using our Shred and our Maul, which takes us out of human form. 3 into Heightened Senses. When you go into Werebear, gain damage reduction. When you go into Werewolf, gain movement speed. And these persist if you're in either of your animal forms. Then finally, for our capstone, 1 with Nature, your companion skills each gain 1 additional companion and deal massively increased damage. You also gain the passive effect of all your companions, and this allows us to have Poison Creeper, which will give us our 3 Poison Creepers, which count as companions, so we get more scaling. They also just run around and poison things to make sure everything is always poisoned. And then we have our Spirit Boons, Wariness to take reduced damage from elites, Avian Wraith for increased critical strike damage. I'm currently using Iron Feather for massively increased max life. I know some people use the attack speed increase, Sight Talons for increased crit, and more importantly, the Lucky Hit is actually good as well. I just like the max life to just stay alive. We have a lot of damage, we have a lot of attack speed. I think the max life is actually really strong for staying alive. We have Pack Leader, which are Lucky Hit critical strikes have a chance to reset your companion skills. This is boosted up a lot by our unique pants. Then combo for the Storm, another Lucky Hit. Nature skills have up to a 10% chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate by 2 seconds. And since our wolves are now also nature, they will be resetting or proc and combo for the Storm to help reset our ultimate. And then we have our Paragon Boards. We're primarily going to be going over the board or glyph selection. If you want to follow point by point, there'll be a build planner in the description. But I think my boards are kind of bad right now. They're not necessarily really bad. They're just really unoptimized right now. And I'm going to reset them and completely redo them once I have a few more points so I can get primarily everything I want. But the board selection and the glyph selection is pretty much going to stay the same. So on our starter board, we have Earth and Sky, which just buffs up magic nodes, so more damage increases. The secondary nature skills deal increased damage to crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies, and our wolves are nature skills, so they'll get more damage. The legendary gives increased nature magic damage as well, so more damage for our wolves. Board 1, we're taking Untamed. Casting a companion skill gives you increased damage for your companions, stacking up to 80%, massive damage increase. The glyph for taking is Keeper, a bonus to rare nodes within range, so just some more companion damage, some more willpower. And secondarily, you and your companions deal increased non-physical damage, so just more companion damage. The legendary increases your non-physical damage. Then the next board is Heightened Malice. While there's a poison enemy nearby, you deal increased damage. This is increased for all the other enemies nearby. This is actually buffed so it works on a single target fights now, so just another big damage increase. The glyph for taking is Spirit, just increased critical strike damage. The secondary, when you crit something, they take more damage from you, stacking up. The legendary, once I get it, is more increased critical strike damage. Then the next board is Thunderstruck. Storm skills deal increased damage, increased by your damage versus close or damage versus distant. Mine's only 46%. I can't get another big chunk of damage from this, up to 60%. But again, our wolves are storm skills, so they'll get the damage from this. Then the glyph for taking is Headhunter, buffs all the rare nodes within range, and then you deal increased damage to elites. Once we get it to legendary, it'll just give us a damage increase. Then the final board we're taking is Lust for Carnage. Critical strikes with werewolf skills restore 2 spirit and deal increased damage. This also does work with our wolves now because one of the legendary aspects turn them into werewolves, so just more damage for our wolves. And then once I get the final glyph, I'll be using the Wilds glyph, which just increases the damage of your companions even more. And then that brings us to our mercenaries. Now you can use pretty much whatever you want. It's not going to be a really big difference, but for our actual mercenary, I'm using Variana just because she gives a lot of attack speed increases. So Hysteria, one of her passives, you gain increased attack speed whenever Variana damages something up to 10%. And then we have Bloodthirst. When she uses this, you also gain increased attack speed, and then the upgrade increases attack speed even more. So there's just a bunch of attack speed increases, but you can also use Subo to get that critical strike damage increase when he uses his ability. That'll be the really good secondary choice. Then for your reinforcement, I generally just recommend you use Rahir, and you use Bastion, which he pops out with a big bubble where he will redirect 90% of the damage you would be taking to him for 5 seconds. It also makes you unstoppable for 1 second, and then you just apply this to be cast when you're injured. So when you get low health, he pops out with this bubble to take a bunch of the damage you would be taking to hopefully save you if you would have died. And then next up, we have our witch powers. Now I have most of the powers I want except one, and I haven't been lucky with getting the lost powers, so that's the one I'm currently not using. But for our unique, we're still using Vengeful Spirit Servant. So every 15 seconds, a Vengeful Spirit is summoned for 10 seconds. While active, any damage you take is redirected to the spirit. Once you max this out and get the secondary, when Vengeful Spirit's life is fully depleted, it rushes and deals some damage to nearby enemies. It is a summon, so it should get a bunch of the different scaling from your summons, but there's also other options. I don't think the unique witch power is actually super important, so you could also use something like Piranha once you get it, which will allow Piranha to pull everything towards you. I know some people are using the cycle because it makes sure everything is poison and it'll heal you and your companions, but I don't think the healing is actually super important, so your unique power isn't actually super important. But for our powers, we're using Poison Frog Servant. It's just another summon, constantly hits things, can pull things to them and taunt them, deals poison damage. This is going to be changed out for aura specialization, which your auras are bigger, which will help with one of our other powers, but you deal increased critical strike damage to enemies within your auras. That's a main reason we'll be using this once we get it. Then we use Hexa Flames, up to a 72% chance to inflict Hexa Flame at a lucky hit. And when Hexa Flame is on an enemy, anytime you damage it, it deals additional fire damage to them. And if it's a crit, that fire damage is actually an AoE. The extra fire damage can actually be decent, but the primary reason we're using this is so a hex is on an enemy, because that will actually tie back into one of the occult gems we would want to be using. Then we're using the absolute most important witch power, which is Grow. After casting an ultimate skill, all of your summons or companions deal massively increased damage, 61% when maxed out, which is huge, but they also gain 100% crit chance for 10 seconds. This will be up a majority of the time, and this means we don't have to worry about critical strike chance in pretty much any other place in our build, because we pop our ultimate, all of our companions have guaranteed crits, and we will have our ultimate up enough to have this up a majority of the time. Then we're using Aura of Siphoning. It's just an aura around you that deals poison damage to all enemies that are in it and heal you every time it deals damage. This is a poison dot it puts on enemies, so that will also proc a bunch of our other effects. And then Soul Harvest. Whenever you use a cooldown, you gain 1% primary core stat per surrounding enemy. This lasts over 20 seconds when max rank, and while there are enemies surrounding you, it has infinite duration. So this massively increases our willpower, and that is actually pretty important because willpower just multiplicatively scales all of your ability damage, but our unique ring that does damage when it pulls everything close to us scales off of that, and we can get so much more primary core stat from this that it just massively increases our damage and the damage from our unique ring. And that brings us to our gear, starting off with our runes. And we're currently using Naga Yam, which you need to maintain at least one summon for 5 seconds, gaining offering up to 6 summons. So you'll gain that offering per every summon. And you need to do this 5 times, so basically just once per proc. And this will invoke your Petrify skill, so your ultimate. And this will restore all of your primary resource. But it is quite weird how this actually works. It doesn't work with all of your effects. It does the normal Petrify, but it doesn't get the max rank upgrade of Petrify to reset the cooldown of our other abilities. So anytime we use Petrify, because we have a max rank, it resets our other cooldowns. When this rune procs, it doesn't do that, but it still pulls in enemies like it's getting the effect from our unique ring, but it also doesn't do the damage proc from our unique ring. So it's kind of weird what it works with, and I will probably be changing this out for the rune that casts the Barbarian's Shout that gives you increased damage, because that's multiplicative damage increase. But either one you have is generally going to be pretty good. This will just make sure Petrify is always on everything. And then the other selection we're using is Yol Se, which you cast a skill with a cooldown. You have to do this 2 times, and it summons a Spirit Wolf Companion for 8 seconds. Now we're constantly resetting our cooldowns. When you use our ultimate, it's a cooldown, resets all of our other cooldowns. We're constantly resetting wolves. So we'll have a lot of these wolves up, and they also scale even more for our companions. But then for our gems in our armor, you just want willpower increase. This is just multiplicative damage increases because it's our main stat. That's also why you want runes on your weapon. So make sure one of your rune sets is on your 2-handed weapon. And then for our jewelry, we're using 3 different occult gems. These aren't our optimal gems because I just don't have the legendary gems yet, but we're currently using your common growth and decay, which powers are 35% more potent. We actually are using a bunch of those. Then we have your common eldritch, which powers are 25% more potent. We're using some of those. And then finally, your companions deal increased direct damage to hexed elites. Because we're using the Hex of Flames, when that gets put on elites, our companions now deal multiplicatively increased damage to those elites. That's a primary reason we're also using Hex of Flames. And we will be changing out these occult gems once we get the legendary ones we want. And that brings us to our legendary aspects. So on our weapon, we have the most important. We have Shepherd's. Companion skills deal an additional up to 26% increased damage per companion you have. This is multiplicative, so this is massive. We'll be summoning a bunch of additional wolves from other things, a bunch of additional werewolves. So we'll have tons of companions for massively increased companion skill damage. Then on our necklace, your wolf companions are now also werewolf companions. They deal massively increased damage, up to 210% multiplicatively increased damage. They can also spread rabies. That's not really important though. Then on our other legendary aspects, kills have a 5% chance to summon a wolf companion to your side, and this becomes a lucky hit against bosses, and you can have a maximum of 3 additional wolves, which are the exact same as your actual wolf summons. They will be actual werewolves, and you gain +3 ranks to wolves. So this is actually just summoning more wolves from your actual wolf skill. So they'll also use the ability when you use the wolf abilities. And then on our gloves, we have gained 1 additional companion. In addition, your companion skills deal increased damage. So just more companions, scaling our companion skill damage, and another boost to our companion skill damage. So pretty much everything is just focused around getting more companions, scaling them, and making their ability, or our 1 companion ability, deal massively increased damage. Then our other aspects on our chest piece, up to 17.5% of your damage you would take is redirected to your companions, and now they can't die, which actually helps their uptime quite a bit, but you take reduced damage. And then on our boots, we're currently using Metamorphosis, so when you evade, you become bats and become unstoppable for 2.5 seconds, but it increases the cooldown of your evade. That's why you want boots that have the implicit of attacks reduce evade's cooldown by 1.5 seconds. So anytime you attack, you reduces cooldown, so you can have this up to have unstoppable up pretty much whenever you need it. And then we already went over all of our uniques. Now, optimally, we would have like 2 more mythic items. We would have a mythic chest piece, and we would have another mythic ring, but I currently don't have those yet, so those will be in the more optimal version of this build. And likewise with all of my builds, I'm not going to go over all of the armor stats. You'll find those all in the build planner. I'll try to have the most optimal ones, but some of the most important things are on your weapon, chance for wolves to deal double damage. That's just your summons. And then things like werewolf attack speed. Now, how attack speed is calculated in the game is actually a little bit unique when specifically talking about your wolf companions, because you can get both wolf's attack speed as rolls, which will increase their attack speed, but you can also get werewolf attack speed as tempering, which is actually a different calculation or a different attack speed modifier. So the caps you would normally get does not count for your werewolf attack speed. So you can get a lot more attack speed, also getting werewolf attack speed on a lot of your tempering. So a lot of your temperings are just wolf's attack speed and werewolf's attack speed. But that's the entirety of this build. This is much stronger than my last version, but the upcoming version, once I progress it a bit more, is also going to be a lot stronger. You can still do everything everything you want in World Tier 4 with this version of the build. And it's something unique because wolves haven't been incredibly strong for the majority of Diablo 4's lifespan. Kind of started last season, but this season I think companion druids are the strongest they've ever been. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.